The Wind Waker has a vast backstory full of destruction and despair, contrary to the friendly art style of the game. Although the time between Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker are only briefly mentioned in the introduction, there are many subtle hints scattered throughout the Zelda series. These clues can piece together a picture of what may have happened to Hyrule and its ancestors. This speculative look at the minor details will reveal a complicated world of turmoil and confusion, giving the Wind Waker a far more profound story than it initially appeared. Before diving into the Wind Waker lore, one must first establish how much time occurred between the adult ending of Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker. Daphne states in the Wind Waker that hundreds of years had passed since the Flood. There are developer quotes that support this claim, which means the Wind Waker takes place any time from 200 to 900 years after Ocarina of Time. This leaves a vague time frame, but before interpreting this period, time itself must be analyzed as expressed within the series. Because there are no definite clocks or calendars within the game, the main reference to time is life expectancy. Spirit Tracks takes place 100 years after Phantom Hourglass. Nico is the only remaining original cast member from the Wind Waker, making him the oldest human character in the game. In the Wind Waker, Nico can be considered an adult, making him approximately 20 years old in both the Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass. Spirit Tracks is 100 years later, making Nico approximately 120 years old. Since Nico is still alive after Spirit Tracks, his lifespan could last even longer. Nico is very old looking, so he probably did not have much longer to live. Based on all this information, life expectancy could approximately be 100 to 150 years. This range nicely includes the lifespan of Tetra and the potential lifespan of Nico from Spirit Tracks. With an estimated life expectancy, it can now be applied to the Reconstruction era of the Wind Waker. In the adult ending of Ocarina of Time, Hyrule is in utter ruins, with its people scattered and Hyrule Castle destroyed. Since the old location of the castle was turned into a pit of lava, the Temple of Time was remodeled into the new Hyrule Castle. This would explain how the Master Sword is secretly located beneath the castle in the Wind Waker. Since the new castle was such a bigger structure than the original, it probably took many years to build. Spirit Tracks had a comparatively similar Reconstruction era. When Tetra first arrived at the soon-to-be New Hyrule, she and her crew had less than 100 years to build a new Hyrule Castle in time for Spirit Tracks. It would take Tetra at most 90 years to build the new Hyrule Castle. Despite the conditions after Ocarina of Time, ancient Hyrule still had plenty of resources, and merely remodeled an existing building, which would take less time, approximately 50 years. Daphnes is the reigning king of ancient Hyrule at the time of the Wind Waker. Based on his knowledge of ancient Hyrule and the comparatively short Reconstruction era of Spirit Tracks, it is probable that Daphnes was the reigning king of Ocarina of Time, or at least became king soon after. In order to be king, Daphnes would likely be well into adulthood already, so he may have been approximately 40 to 50 years old. After another 50 years passed during Reconstruction, Daphnes would be 90 to 100 years old. Considering Daphne's age and the speculated life expectancy, Ganon had to return soon after Hyrule was rebuilt, with the Flood very soon to follow. From this, the estimated time between the ending of Ocarina of Time and the Flood was approximately 50 to 80 years. This closely reflects the evidence from the Reconstruction era of Spirit Tracks and fits within the potential age of Daphnes. After the Flood, the Hylian ancestors were forced to start over once again, and the history of Hyrule was gradually lost to most people. As suggested by the introduction, very few people from the Wind Waker remember anything about Hyrule's history. For this total loss of history to happen, a minimum of 3 generations must occur. The original survivors of the Great Flood obviously knew their past. When they raised their children, the kids probably had at least a vague idea of what had happened, even if their parents avoided talking about it. But by the 3rd generation, parents may or may not have wanted their children to know their past. From this generation forward could be the potential time that the Wind Waker began. With the life expectancy estimate and the minimum of 3 generations, approximately 120 to 170 years passed after the Flood and before the Wind Waker. If 50 to 80 years occurred between Ocarina of Time and the Flood, and 120 to 170 years occurred between the Flood and the Wind Waker, then the minimum time frame between Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker would be approximately 170 to 250 years. This is only a minimum estimate because the time period between the Flood and the Wind Waker can be expanded to include several more generations, and still fit within the 900-year cap. Now that there is a vague timetable set for this period, a detailed look may explain what happened to ancient Hyrule. Ganondorf's return to Hyrule after Ocarina of Time probably did not result in such a sudden takeover as before. Defense in Hyrule was probably taken much more seriously. This clarifies why the Hylians were able to wait for the Hero of Time to return. To their disappointment, he did not come, so they prayed to the goddesses for help. Ganon's forces eventually broke through the castle defenses, where Hyrule's losing battle continued. The survivors of Hyrule climbed to the mountaintops as the goddesses drowned the rest of Hyrule. Because there were so few mountains in Ocarina of Time, the goddesses likely had to create several new mountains moments before drowning Hyrule, which later became the numerous small islands seen in the Wind Waker. After just rebuilding their society following Ganondorf's initial attack on Hyrule, the Hylians must once again start over. What little population they managed to remake after Ocarina of Time was suddenly split between several islands. Everything they owned was destroyed, and they were stranded with only a handful of other people. This is the life the goddesses left for them. One couldn't help but resent the goddesses for what they had done. Many probably shared Ganondorf's disgust with the goddesses. Perhaps this alone forced the loss of history. Parents probably didn't want their children to acknowledge the goddesses after they took away so much from them. When Link first arrives at Forsaken Fortress, Tetra mentions a rival pirate gang used to convene at that location. Since Ganondorf and his minions resided within Forsaken Fortress at the time, Tetra was likely referring to the Gerudo thieves, who were closely related to Ganondorf. The Gerudo were the only missing race from the Wind Waker, and the similarly named Gerudo's Fortress from Ocarina of Time and Forsaken Fortress support this connection. This theory is further supported by Majora's Mask, where the parallel Gerudo are referred to as pirates. The goddesses succeeded at stalling Ganondorf after his return to Hyrule, but it would not last forever. The Master Sword had locked Ganon's forces inside Hyrule, and the goddesses trapped Ganon within the barrier of Hyrule beneath the ocean. Ganondorf eventually found a way to pass the barrier and reach the surface through a dark portal, opening an entrance to the Gerudo's fortress. With most of his army still trapped in Hyrule, Ganondorf slowly built a new militia and began his search for the Triforce and the new sages. The original sages likely learned of the Great Flood and perhaps helped provide Hyrule with the opportunity to escape. As Ganondorf says, the Master Sword was the key to locking away his minions in a frozen colorless state. This isn't the only time such a thing has happened. The Master Sword has the power to banish evil, which seems to include this power to stop evil beings in place or even turn them into stone. The power of the Master Sword is also temporary, requiring the sword to be recharged. In Ocarina of Time, after each sage was rescued, they lent their power to Link by giving him a medallion. These medallions were perhaps channeled through the Master Sword in order to give Link the strength to defeat Ganon. In the Wind Waker, it appears this charge from Ocarina of Time was out. The frozen state of Hyrule suggests that the Master Sword was used, but in a unique way, affecting the entire castle rather than a single person. This extraordinary event left the Master Sword empty, requiring the new sages to recharge the Master Sword again years later. Since the Hero of Time was not present just prior to the Flood, someone else must have utilized the Master Sword. The sages appeared to carry divine power over the Master Sword, so it is possible that they were the ones to use the Master Sword in Link's absence. After unleashing the Master Sword on Ganon's forces, the Hylians escaped the castle just before the goddesses flooded the earth. Since the sages were unable to repower the Master Sword, they likely fell to the Flood, or perhaps Ganon himself. While the fate of Princess Zelda is unknown, her lineage survived the Flood in order to pass on the Triforce of Wisdom. Tetra never met Princess Zelda, since Tetra had no idea of her destiny. However, Tetra did know a lot more about Hyrule than others. Within Tetra's quarters in the pirate ship are several pictures on her walls. These are mostly recycled pictures seen from the introduction of the game, which indicates that Tetra knew quite a bit about Hyrule and the events of Ocarina of Time. There is also an image of a dark-haired woman. This woman is likely either Tetra's mother or guardian, and the original captain of her ship. While Tetra's mother knew of her destiny, the initial goal of the ship was to conceal and protect Tetra's true identity, even from herself. This may have worked initially, but the pressure of the growing Gerudo's threat put them on the offensive. Since no known Gerudo was left by the time of the Wind Waker, this may indicate the crew killed a number of the Gerudos. This could have turned their ship infamous and developed their persona as pirates. This is likely how Tetra shaped her personality based on such behavior. At some point, Tetra's mother dies, probably from the conflict with the Gerudos, and Tetra takes the role of captain at a surprisingly young age. The untimely death of her mother probably left Tetra with several unanswered questions about her past, since parts of it were kept from her on purpose. After inheriting her mother's necklace and the Gossip Stones, Tetra decided to look further into her past. The final picture in Tetra's cabin is a sea chart outlining 3 locations of the goddess's pearls. Drawn in between is the Triforce, suggesting that Tetra knew about the access to Hyrule. Once the Helmara King expressed his interest in Tetra, she knew the war with the Forsaken Fortress must continue, and to do so she needed the Master Sword. For further details on the Reconstruction era, please visit ZeldaInformer.com for the full written article. I'd be happy to take any questions, comments, or arguments you may have on the comment page at Zelda Informer or on the Zelda Informer forums.